All right, guys, welcome back to our study of the Gospel of Mark. Now, the last time we were here, we were in chapter 10, and we were looking at the occasion of the rich young ruler who came to Jesus. And as we recall it, this young man came to Jesus seeking something definitive that would guarantee his interest into the kingdom of God. And his address of Jesus was somewhat unusual because he called Jesus good teacher. However, Jesus informed him that there was none good but God, maybe somewhat implying that, are you calling me God? Jesus was saying to him, but even more so, how the young ruler considered himself. He thought of himself to be good. Jesus saying, none is good but God. But nevertheless, Jesus answered his question with respect to the commandments in the law of Moses, saying that you knew them and that to obey these commandments, do these things. And the ruler enthusiastically replied to Jesus that even as a youth, he kept these particular commandments. However, uniquely about the commandments that Jesus gave him were the commandments of how men should do and act towards men. And even though he may have thought that he kept these things perfectly, he did not. But nevertheless, Jesus entertained that particular notion. And so, looking intently at this young man, he said that if you really want to be perfect, if you really want to enter into the kingdom of God as you requested of me, you have an issue, you have a problem, and it is you have violated the very first commandment of all. Love the Lord your God. I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the house of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You will have no other gods before me. Jesus looked into this young man's heart and knew that what he loved above all else was his wealth, was money. And thus he told him, this is that transformation that you need. So thus sell all that you have, give to the poor, and come and follow me. But this young man was unwilling to do that. He was unwilling to divorce the love of his life, money, and follow after God. And thus he was very saddened by the words, turned and walked away. Now, all of this happened in the very presence and sight of the disciples. And so they saw this and they were somewhat shocked. And Jesus used this occasion, as he would often do. He used this as an object lesson for the disciples and turned and said to them how difficult it was for a rich person to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And then he reiterated that with greater gravity. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And again, shocked the disciples were. Why were the disciples shocked? Because they had always believed and even had been taught by the rabbis of that day was that great wealth was a sign of God's favor. So therefore, if you were wealthy, it is an indication that God is favoring you. And if God is favoring you, then of course you shall enter into the kingdom of God. However, Jesus dispelled with this wrong notion. And then we can see that the disciples still hanging on to the thing concerning wealth because this was what was in their heart. And so Jesus said to them, he said, listen, you don't understand it as you should. A person who is so concerned with wealth will not be able to lead or give his heart to God completely. And so Jesus once again said that even though this is impossible, Peter said, Lord, who then can be saved? That is the hanging on to this concept of being wealthy, this desire for wealth, and also to this association of wealth with the kingdom. That's what Peter was asking. And Jesus simply said, this is impossible for you to do, but God can do a work in the heart. God can fix the heart in such a way that you will love him above all things. The Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear you, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. You shall therefore love the Lord with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your strength. Only God can do this thing inside of you. So therefore, Jesus was teaching the disciples the necessity of having nothing else before God, and also at the same time where true wealth lies. So he continued on in his words saying, and none of you have left father, mother, sisters, or houses, or things of that nature. That is, former relationships, as well as the abandoning of former wealth for my sake and the gospel. But you will receive even more. God will establish new relationships. He'll give you a new family, and also God will provide for your needs. But he warned them, be careful of how you consider things. And that's what he meant when he said, the first shall be last. That's the rich young ruler. The rich young ruler who was unwilling to receive Jesus' words and follow after Jesus, he became last. Last, he didn't enter into the kingdom. That was his request, to enter into the kingdom. Thus, he did not get what he was seeking after. But also, the last will be first. Who is the last? Those who are willing to suffer, those who are willing to have no other gods, those who are willing to lose relationships, lose wealth for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of Christ and the gospel. These become first. These ones become honored and will enter into the kingdom. All right. So now let's continue on in the remainder of chapter 10. So we'll be looking at verses 32 to the end of the chapter. That's in verse 52. Now it seems long. However, I don't think, now you guys know how I am. However, I don't think that this will be too long, but we are still continuing on Jesus's journey to Jerusalem. Now remember now, this is the final, if you let me say it this way, leg of the trip in such a way as Jesus will be going into Jerusalem, and therefore his final week, he will be crucified. So we're going to enter to that section. And also too, don't forget that ever since that Jesus began to teach the people in parables, when the leaders called Jesus demon possessed, Jesus began to focus his attention on the training of his disciples for their future ministry. That is, the future ministry of the kingdom, the new mystery kingdom, which is the church. However, the mindset, we have to remember this, so important. So let me say this so we can get into it. It won't be long. The mindset of the disciples is still holding fast. They are looking for a right now kingdom of Jesus. They are looking and expecting for Jesus to soon be glorified, and they themselves will share in the glory of Jesus' kingdom. And even so, they have a misunderstanding what it is to be glorified. So Jesus is still continuing to teach his disciples what it means to be in the kingdom, or that expectation of the kingdom. That is, when I say expectation, without making this too long, the expectation is the kingdom as you are expecting it, even as John the Baptist expected it. Remember when John sent his servants to Jesus, said, I'm confused. Are you not the Messiah? Should you not be establishing the kingdom? This is not for now. And also, too, the mindset that you need to have as servants in the kingdom. So this is what this section will be all about. All right. So no further ado, let's just get into the text and see what is going on. 32, they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking on ahead of them. And they were amazed, and those who followed were fearful. And again, he took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him, saying, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit on him and scourge him and kill him. And 3 days later, he will rise again. Beautiful section. So now notice, so even after, as they were on their way, notice going to Jerusalem. And this helps us to understand what, as I said earlier, this is that final leg of the journey when Jesus goes up to Jerusalem to be crucified. Jesus, as picturesque, this is that picturesque scene of a rabbi walking ahead of, leading his disciples. And the imagery of this does have spiritual connotations as well. Not only is he walking physically walking ahead of them to Jerusalem, but also he is leading them. He is showing them the way. He is leading them in the right path. He is teaching them how to do, how to be, how to think, and also too clearly by the text, he is teaching them what to expect. So this is kind of pregnant with meaning, not just the physical of Jesus walking, but also the spiritual per his example in all things. But anyway, so and then I believe this is like the third time in Mark's gospel, he makes them aware of the impending things that he will suffer once he gets to Jerusalem. And one thing that is key here, Jesus elaborates. He gives more detail than he has up to at any time concerning the peril that faced him in Jerusalem. Notice again, he uses the title with reference to himself, Son of Man. And remember, and we don't have time to get into this on every single stop, but if you have been following me in the teachings of the gospel, even in the Gospel of Mark, we always want to make special notation to how Jesus references himself with respect to the titles. Son of Man, which refers to his humanity. Remember, when Jesus would give reference to himself by titles, he predominantly used two titles, Son of God and Son of Man. Son of God is the title referencing Jesus's deity. Son of Man references Jesus's humanity. And think about this, as we are speaking concerning the death and the resurrection of Jesus, he uses the title Son of Man. Why? As Son of God, as a simple divine, that's not the way to say it, simple, but as a divine being, he cannot die. However, as a human being, he can die. So there we see what within Jesus is both Son of God, 100%, and Son of Man. He is both God and man at the same time. And by being a man, he is able to die. So he talks about the things he suffered. He'll go to the chief priests. They'll condemn him to death. They would turn him over to the Gentiles. And one of the reasons why is because they wanted to humiliate him to the utmost. And also, too, legally, it was not permissible for Jews to put anybody to death. That is, Rome. Rome had enacted a law that capital punishment can only be served by Rome. But nevertheless, we're not there yet. And so they would end up mocking him, spitting on him, scourge him. That is, they would flog him. And then after 3 days, he will rise again. Now, the beautiful thing about this thing that Jesus is saying here, and even as he has noted earlier concerning his sufferings, death, and his resurrection, it is literal. Jesus is not speaking in some type of a covert way or some type of a parabolic way or some type of a confusing way. It is just, how else can you take it? He told you, when we get to Jerusalem, these things are going to happen to me. But as it has been in the past with the disciples, and even we're going to see now in the very next section, they just don't get it. If Jesus is going to suffer these things that he has just told you about, it must be something that is different in the program that you believe that Jesus will fulfill. What do I mean by that? They are believing that Jesus will go into Jerusalem. Now, at the same time, because I need to pay attention here, notice in verse number 32, they were amazed and fearful. So I need to answer that question. Why are they amazed and fearful? And then Jesus telling them what's going to happen. Jesus has already been antagonized by the religious leaders. The disciples knew that these leaders were seeking some way to have Jesus put to death. They were seeking that. And now Jesus is about to go into the lion's den itself. And so therefore the disciples, as they are following Jesus, they're afraid for what might happen to Jesus, and even indirectly what will happen to them as followers of Jesus. And so now, Jesus, they've been seeking to kill you, and you're going to go to Jerusalem, the place of their power, the very center of the power of the religious leaders who are looking to kill you. So they're afraid. But the point is, Jesus told them all these things that would befall him, and yet they did not get it. As the next section will say, and the reason is because they were almost sealed in their thinking process of what Jesus should do. He should go into Jerusalem and ultimately be crowned king and then reign in glory, not thinking that somehow there must be some kind of a shift. Why? Because we didn't expect Jesus to die, and he keeps telling us about death and resurrection. Lord, kind of comment on that. Make us understand your plan. They didn't ask that. They just still persisted on what they thought should happen, how they thought the game should be played out. How do we know? Let's look at the next section, verse 35. James and John, the two sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. Wow. They wanted Jesus to give them a blank check. But anyway, let's keep going. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? They said to him, Grant that we may sit, one on your right and one on your left, in your glory. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. So now notice something. It is clear that the disciples have really disregarded, and not just simply disregarded, they have been rejecting what Jesus has been saying to them about his suffering, death, and resurrection. Why? They are still stuck on Jesus's glory. That is, what they believe is about to happen to Jesus. And that's what it means by the statement, in your glory. They were looking for right then a present time reign of Jesus. Jesus himself would sit as the king of Israel, and he would dominate not only the nation of Israel, but even all of the Gentile nations. So what do we see here? We see James and John, and we find in other gospels that this was actually done through the mediation of their mother, which would be Jesus's aunt. Or sometimes we say his auntie. And the idea would be that he would not refuse their mother. He wouldn't refuse his aunt. But nevertheless, Mark just simply says James and John. Why? Because this is being instigated by James and John. They put their mother up to doing these things. So they come to Jesus with a request to sit on his right and his left. So by sitting on the right, these are glorified positions. They didn't ask for which one Jesus would choose, because whoever would sit on the right, that is really the greatest position of them all. And then the secondary position would be the one sitting on the left. So it would be the picture of Jesus being great king. And now, who is under Jesus at the first? It would be the one on the right. And who would be the one next to that? The one on the left. And James and John left that part open to Jesus. Whichever ones of us you choose, me or my brother, to sit on the right. Now, that part is up to you. Just make it so that we are the ones, James and John, sitting on the right. All right. So they wanted positions of elevation in what they believe would be the soon reign and domination of Jesus. That's what they wanted. Now, before we go any further, I'm not going to get into the Greek text a lot. I'm not going to do that a lot today, so I'm not going to show it on the screen. However, I do want to bring your attention to the verbal usages in the Greek that we have in this section. The first thing that I'll say is, remember, what the disciples are wanting to do is have future elevation. In other words, this is not happening now. It's not happening in the past. They want Jesus, once he enters into this glorious reign, then to sit them on his right and on his left. This will be something done in the future. Now, how does this, or what does this have to do with what I'm going to talk about in the Greek? The word that is used here for do in verse number 35, we want you to do, is the word poieses. What is important about this word is the tense of this word is, and I'm not going to get it deep into the Greek grammar, but it's aorist subjunctive. Subjunctive means that which, in that possibility to do. However, the aorist tense of that, remember that I've told you, if you've been following me here, the aorist always deals with an action that has already taken place. So notice, why use a verb tense for an action that has already taken place when it has not taken place? They want Jesus to seat them on his right hand and his left hand in the future glory, in that near future glory. But they use, let me say it this way, a past tense verb. The reason why they use this past tense verb, and we're going to see this aorist tense in this section being used again and again and again. I might not point all of them out to you, but I will point some of them out. But the reason for the aorist tense being used here, it is for the emphatic sense of the word. That is, settle the issue. Settle the issue. So they're saying this. So notice this. You have Jesus, you have James and John, of course, their mother. Now, Mark didn't bring their mother into this picture, but she's in the background doing this on behalf of her sons. But you have all of the 12 disciples there. And now James and John come to Jesus with a question. And basically what they're saying is, Jesus, settle it once and for all. Who will be sitting on your right hand and on your left hand in your glory? You see what they're saying? They want Jesus to say, okay, Jesus, say it now, and say it in such a way nobody will doubt. Nobody will doubt what? Who will be sitting on your right hand and on your left hand, and let it be one of us. Settle it even before, in front of, in the sight of, in the hearing of the rest of the disciples, the rest of our brothers. And that's why it uses that aorist tense there. And so verse number 38, the response of Jesus, but Jesus said to them, you do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? They said to him, we are able. And Jesus said to them, the cup that I drink, you shall drink, and you shall be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized. But to sit on my right or on my left, this is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. Okay, let me stop there, because that's a point for itself. So Jesus answers their request. So, and he begins and says, number one, you really don't understand what you are asking me. That is, to sit at such elevated places of glory when the Messiah begins to reign. Now, Jesus is not saying he is about to reign like they are thinking, but Jesus is saying one day he will reign as they expect. It's just not today. He has right now a mission to accomplish. In his first coming, the mission to accomplish was the mission of salvation. He had to die and be resurrected from the dead. He had, as he will say here, to give his life a ransom for many. He had to make provision for sin. That's what he did in his first coming. In his second coming, he will establish his kingdom, and there will be someone sitting on his right and on his left. However, they don't understand the gravity of their question. And that's just what he is saying. You don't know what you're asking. And notice how he associates. This is so important. I don't want to spend a lot of time, so catch on to it. Notice how Jesus associates being honored, sitting in elevated, honored places beside him. He associates that with sufferings. And that's what he meant by, are you able to drink? And remember what we said about that aorist tense, aorist meaning something to be done. And it's like a sense of emphaticness. Remember the aorist being an emphaticness. And Jesus continues that same mentality in the sense of, remember the disciples like, say it once and for all, settle it once and for all. He uses that same aorist tense in the sense when he says to drink and also to be baptized. And to drink and to be baptized is nothing more than metaphorical language for suffering. That is what Jesus is talking about. That is all, nothing more. To drink from the cup, it is a cup of bitterness, a cup of suffering. Baptized, remember this very sense of baptism means to be associated with, identified with. So to drink from the cup of Jesus, the cup of bitterness, the cup of suffering, to be baptized with the baptism of Jesus, to be identified with Jesus in his sufferings. So he says, are you able to suffer like I am going to suffer? And even note that Jesus just said that his sufferings, he just said it. I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to be mistreated by the chief priest. I'm going to be hit upon, beat upon. I'm going to be beaten with sticks. Ultimately, I will be crucified. This is great sufferings. Can you drink this? Can you be associated with me in sufferings? Baptized like this? And this is what Jesus was trying to say to them. So he says, and they answer to Jesus with even, it's like without even blinking an eye. And this lets you know they really weren't thinking about what Jesus was saying. The whole context of all is about suffering and suffering greatly. They wanted honor. Jesus said those who occupied the places of honor are those who suffered like I did. Okay? Now, they answered quickly, which meant they really didn't think about suffering because Jesus said, can you and will you, are you willing to suffer in this manner? They didn't think about the suffering. They were thinking about one thing, getting what they wanted. What did they want? They wanted to sit at elevated places by the side of Jesus. That's all they were thinking about. So they just answered quickly, yeah, we can do it. We can do it. Be careful of what you wish. You just might get it. Now, why did I make that statement? When we turn to the book of Acts, we find out this very same James, the apostle, the brother of John, James was the first apostle who was killed. He was the very first one. And even as we get to the very end of it, although it seems, according to tradition, we do have it, And even in the text of scripture, there is no mention of John, this very John here. John was exiled to the Isle of Patmos. And so therefore we see John being grievously mistreated. Jesus said, indeed, you will suffer. They spoke so quickly that they were able. Notice, are you able was what Jesus asked them. And what did they say? Oh, yeah, we able, we able. And Jesus answered, indeed, indeed, you will suffer. And thus it became true. It was fulfilled in their lifetime. All right, what? So they answered Jesus, saying that they were able to do so. And Jesus continued, verse 40, but to sit, that's still that continuation of that aorist that I've been telling you guys about in a definitive way. To sit on my right, on my left is not mine to give. Give also is that aorist tense. In other words, for you to sit and it's settled, or for me to give, this thing is settled too. What? I cannot give it, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. That is, without even going deep into it, and we cannot because our Lord did not. But the idea that Jesus is giving is that the one who will sit on my right and my left, this decision is made by the Father. And thus even I cannot make this decision. That this definitive decision that you guys wanted to be able to sit on my right hand and on my left hand. Now, before I go any further, you have to understand what the disciples were asking Jesus and how they were picturing the kingdom, the glory of Jesus and themselves. This is excruciatingly important to understand it. They were thinking of themselves and Jesus. Now, Jesus indeed will be seated in power and glory. This is Psalm 2. Oh, Lord, I don't want to go into that. Why did the heathen rage, and what was their problem with God's anointed one that they wanted to break the bounds, the strength of Jesus's authoritative power over them? And they had come to a decision that they will break the Messiah's rule and reign. Okay, that's Psalm 2. We can't do that. But the disciples were thinking, James and John, that they themselves, this was the spirit that they had as they were thinking about Jesus ruling and reigning with power and a sense of indignation over those who were subject to him. They were seeing themselves in this sense. So remember, one would be the primary one on the right, one would be the secondary one on the left, and they would be sitting as. And we'll talk about that as we continue. 41, hearing this, the 10 began to feel indignant with James and John. Calling them to himself, Jesus said to them, you know, that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. But it is not this way among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So what happens? So now, remember, James and John comes to Jesus with this request to be elevated. And here's the idea, to be elevated above their brethren. You got 12 apostles, 12 disciples. Now remember, there were other disciples that followed them, but the 12 were unique. This is why they and they alone are called the apostles in this, how can I say it? In a unique sense. Let me just use that word again. They were considered to be apostles in a unique sense. And this is one of the reasons why they were called the 12. So it was understood that the 12, by being with Jesus and having this unique relationship with Jesus, they would sit in honored positions. So that part was understood. However, what James and John wanted was they wanted the greatest positions of all in the kingdom. They wanted to sit on the right and on the left hand, and even the other disciples. What did I just say? Even the other disciples would be subject to them, to James and John, even. And the thing now, and one of the reasons we can see, let me move on. I don't want to be too long. You guys know my habit, that James and John would think inherently that they may have some sort of a right to this because they seemingly had a closer relationship along with Peter, James, and John. A closer relationship with Jesus. They were able to witness things. Remember Jesus' transfiguration on the Mount. And they may have thought that in some way that this made them closer in the sense of having an inherent right. If anybody should be in an exalted position with Jesus, it should be us. And since Peter was a part of the game, James and John are brothers, they want to make sure that they beat him to the point. But even more so, they want to beat the rest of them to the point so that Jesus would settle this in front of all of the apostles, in front of all of the disciples who sits in these elevated positions. And this is why you see in verse 41, the other 10 becoming indignant. That means indignant. They were smoking hot. And the reason why they were hot, basically, beat them to the point. He said, doggone it, the James and John, they doggone it. And so, and also too about somebody trying to rule over them. This is the human fleshly spirit. And thus, what does Jesus do? Let's move through. Jesus uses this as an object lesson to teach his disciples. He calls them to himself. So you can see Jesus calling the disciples, even calling the 12. He said, okay, you guys know how things work in the world of the Gentiles, or you can even say in the unsaved world. Those who are rulers lord it over. Now, I'm not going to look at that long Greek word here for lord over or exercise authority, especially that word for exercise authority. It's almost like 20 letters long. But the idea, those who are rulers among the Gentiles, he said, lord it over and exercise authority over them, that is, over the people. And by lord it over, he uses this is the idea, to kind of to sit in such a way to be domineering. That's the idea. You got to catch that. This is absolutely important. They sit like kings and to dominate those who they rule over and those who come before them. You can, so in your mind, picture someone coming before the king, or picture someone coming before the ruler, and the ruler sits in an exalted place. Remember, that's what James and John wanted to do, sit on the right and the left. The ruler sits in an exalted place, considering himself. This is important. Considering himself to be above them, he considers himself to be above the person who is coming before him. And also at the same time, as this ruler who is over them, and he exercises authority over them. This is this point now. Whatever he says, this word is not to be trifled with. In other words, thus saith the ruler, and thus you do. And this is what is being implied. So catch this part, guys. You come to me as the ruler, I, the one who is over you, I, the one who is greater than you, with power you don't have, one who sits above you. I decree that you should do this. And here's the key. I don't care what you think. I don't care how you feel. You just do what I told you to do. This is what Jesus is talking about. When you look at the rulers in the world, this is the attitude of them. This is how they see themselves, and this is how they see and treat those who come to them. He says, this is what they do. They lord it over them. However, verse number 43, but this is not the way among you. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I do want to bring your attention, but it is not. Is. Jesus uses a present tense verb. What is so important about the present tense verb? Remember, James and John were coming to Jesus looking to be seated in the near future reign of Jesus. Lord, you're going to get ready to reign. Sit one of us on the right hand and your left hand when that time comes. Notice by Jesus using this present tense verb, he is saying, this is how it is now, and this is what it shall continue to be with you. It is this way now, and it is this way in the future. And remember what Jesus is trying to do. He is preparing them for their future, and they don't understand it. They don't know it. But Jesus is preparing them for their future ministry in the church. How should they be for the members, for Jesus' sheep in the church? As apostles, as the foundation. No, Jesus is the cornerstone and the apostles are the foundation. They become the leaders in the church of Jesus Christ. How should they be towards all the rest, even their own brothers, even the other 10? Even if one is elevated in such a way, what should he be like? And we'll find out that in the end, it will be Peter. Peter will be the one elevated in the church. Now, I'm not talking about the kingdom that is to come. Remember, Jesus said that decision is not his. The Father has already made that determination for the one he has prepared, all right? But Peter is the one who will be chosen by Jesus, as we will see in the book of Acts. What is it stated here? What is made clear? Even the Apostle Paul makes clear, I believe it's in the book of Galatians, as the apostleship to the Jews was given to Peter, even as the apostleship to the Gentiles was given to Paul. So we see that these things, these elevated positions, elevation in service, Jesus is simply trying to prepare them. But what? Too much. He is saying, you guys got the wrong mindset. You're thinking like Gentiles who's supposed to be huffy-puffy, domineering over people who come before them in a sense. You see yourself in the wrong way as some kind of an elevated judge or ruler. It is not this way. It won't be this way amongst you. But what? Whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. So Jesus now saying, instead, he's giving them another picture. Instead of seeing themselves sitting elevated and domineering over their subjects, see yourself as being the servant of all. And he continues this same picture. Whoever wishes to be first, the same thing about first, meaning you want to be the leader, you want to be the greatest one, whoever wants to be first. Notice the terminology. It is drastic in the minds of the disciples. It crushes. It literally crushes what they are thinking, what they desired, what James and John desired, even the rest of the disciples desired. You will be a slave. A slave is a household servant, the one who washes his master's feet. That means you do the service. If you truly want to be first, you become the slave of all. If you truly want to be great, you become the servant of all. So Jesus redefined what true greatness was for his disciples. True greatness is to serve. And then once again, hallowing back to what Jesus was saying, walking down the road about what he himself would suffer, how he would suffer humiliation, death, and then be resurrected. Looking back on that, Jesus used himself as an example for this in verse 45. For even the Son of Man, Jesus himself, what? He did not come to be served. And again, he keeps using that aorist tense. Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve. Again, that aorist tense. And even to give. Again, that aorist. It is so beautiful. And again, to give his life a ransom for many. In other words, Jesus uses himself as the primary example of what it means to be greatest. Who can deny? Just think about the disciples themselves. If you ask them the question, who is the greatest in the whole wide world? Every one of them would answer quickly and immediately, it is this one, Jesus. Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. He is the greatest of them all. And Jesus says, and with this being the case, notice something about me. I didn't come into this world to be served like you guys are thinking, like you guys are wanting. I came to serve. I came to serve. I came in humiliation and to give my life as a ransom for many. And the point of Jesus in giving his life as a ransom for many, the idea of ransom brings in redemption, a price that is paid, and that is for sin. Jesus came to be a sin offering to pay the debt that none of us could pay for ourselves. So thus, Jesus was the greatest servant of all, and thus he is telling the disciples, follow me. Follow me in your thinking. Follow me in how you do your pattern of behavior. Follow me in how you perceive greatness and wanting to be great. Okay, I'm about to preach. I don't want to preach. I want to teach all the way through how you want to be great. If you want to be great, I'm great, says Jesus. And you want to be great? Then be like me. Serve others. Get off your high horse. Stop thinking so much of yourself. Your thinking is altogether wrong. It's not about being served. It's about serving. And the greatest one, and let me say it this way in a practical sense so you guys can get it. The most gifted person in the church. This is not the person to simply be lauded as being lauded means to be praised. As somebody so special, that such as the pastor and teacher, which probably may be one of the most gifted individuals in your church. Oh my goodness, let everybody serve him. No, he becomes the servant to the church. He becomes the servant to the members in the church. The pastor, as the greatest in the church, he is the least in the church. Why? Because the pastor is the slave. The pastor is not the king. The pastor is the slave. He is the one entrusted. And when I say entrusted, that means to be privileged. It is a privilege to be given these duties. It is a privilege to be given this obligation by God and the Spirit. It is a privilege to be called by Jesus to serve his people. But he becomes the greatest servant of everybody. The lowest member in the church is the pastor. And this is the problem with the church today. So many preachers see themselves as little kings over their little fiefdoms. They see the church as their little kingdoms, whether it's small church or some kind of a mega church, especially these doggone mega churches. I can see in my mind right now, and I've said to you guys before, I'll bring it up to you again. Look at the thumbnail that I included for this video if you haven't looked at it. Remember Eddie Long, when all of this mess went down behind Eddie Long and he's trying to reassert his authority, and he has some per se Jewish man come into the church speaking things over him, prophesying things, really, and calling Eddie Long a king, draping him with something and giving him something that's supposed to be as if it's the law of God. Eddie Long sitting in the chair, raising his hand to say, I'm receiving what you, that was the danger when he said, raise the hand, the idea, I'm receiving what you're saying about me. And then the man calls 4 men to the chair he was sitting on, raised Eddie Long up and lifted him above the congregation, calling him a king. Have you lost your rabbit mind? And the first thing I said concerning Eddie Long, in the sense, and I say this in a biblical sense, you fool. There is but one king, and those people that you are having yourself lifted up and lifted above, it's in the wrong way. They are the ones who are to be lifted up by you. They are the ones to be served by you. But the problem that we are having in the church now, it's been in the church forever, is that these little pastors and preachers and whatnot see themselves as little kings. Your heart, like the heart of the disciples, is not right. We are not served by the congregation. We serve them. But this is not the end of that story. Preaching is over. What? With this in mind, now looking at verse 46 through 52, we're going to try to make it short. I know I've been a little long, but it is absolutely necessary because now we're going to see the healing of a man by the name of Bartimaeus, right? And notice, this man was a blind man. Jesus has healed blind men before. But notice the detail that it gives here specifically, even in the naming of this man, in the healing of blind Bartimaeus. And at the same time, why is this miracle of healing being included here? You got to think about the background and the context. The what? Background and the context. There is meaning to this with respect to the context. What? James and Jesus talking about his suffering and death. His suffering and death, as Jesus said, is a form of his serving. It's a form of his serving. James and John wanting to be elevated, think about them in being domineering and other people serving them and the disciples mad, and Jesus having to teach them the proper way they need to think about themselves. You got it now? This miracle applies to this scene. So let's go. Then they came to Jericho, and he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd. A blind beggar named Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, was sitting by the road. When he heard that it was Jesus the Nazarene, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Many were sternly telling him to be quiet, but he kept crying out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, call him here. So they called the blind man, saying to him, take courage, stand up, he's calling for you. Throwing aside his cloak, he jumped up and came to Jesus. And answering him, Jesus said, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, oh, I like that. What do you want? Rabboni, I want to regain my sight. And Jesus said to him, go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight and began, I want to preach. He began following him on the road. Okay, watch. So what now? This miracle. They're on their way coming out of, 46 may seem confusing. They came to Jericho and then he was leaving Jericho. This is basically coming out of old Jericho, what we would call biblical Jericho, Jericho of the Old Testament, into New Jericho. This is the new city to the which I believe King Herod had built, but it's called New Jericho. So he's coming into New Jericho on his way still to Jerusalem, and there he's met with large crowds, and the blind beggar, a blind man, he's blind. By being blind, he can't work, can't see, he can't work, so he has to beg for a living. Blind beggar is sitting by the road, and his name is Bartimaeus, right? So he's there blind. He hears that Jesus is passing through. Now, a couple of points. Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. I kind of like the way they did that in verse number 46 when they called him Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. By saying Bartimaeus, Bartimaeus is not really a name. They kind of made it a proper name, but it's not really a name. Bartimaeus is Aramaic. It's Aramaic for son of Timaeus. And notice they simply repeated it. Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, and they repeated it. What? Son of Timaeus. So it became a proper name. The reason you may be thinking to yourself, well, why is this particular blind man named? Is because notice at the very end in verse number 52, he followed Jesus. So this man was saved, and also this man later on became a follower of Jesus. So thus he became known to the church. He was what? Later on known to the church. This man whom Jesus opened his eyes one day became a member of the church and was known by the community of the saints. But anyway, so he heard that Jesus was coming down the road, and in doing so, he cried out to Jesus, Son of David. The only thing that I'm going to say here is by this reference, Son of David, it is a messianic reference. What the man is showing is personal faith in Jesus. Remember, at this point in the ministry of Jesus, in order to be the recipient of a miracle, you had to have faith for yourself. Now, earlier at the very beginnings of Jesus' ministry, it was not necessary to have personal faith. Jesus healed people to demonstrate, to prove, and to show evidence he was the Messiah. But once they rejected him, from that point on, each individual had to have faith in Jesus for himself. That's why Jesus said at the end, again in verse 52, your faith has made you whole. Your personal faith, your personal belief in me has made you whole. So the people, verse number 48, as the man was crying out to Jesus, and the man is crying out loudly, thinking that Jesus, they considered the man to be insignificant. Jesus, in other words, is like, man, shut your mouth. Jesus ain't got time to fool with you. But nevertheless, the more that they tried to dissuade him from calling after Jesus, the louder he became and the more he called him, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. So hearing the man, he called Jesus' attention. Jesus stopped where he was, stopped walking, called the man to himself. Tell him, come to me. So the man, now it becomes a little more private. So they called the blind man. Jesus is calling for you. Calm down. It's great. You're in good shape now. Come and see him. Bringing the blind man to Jesus. And so the blind man took off those beggar's clothes and he came to Jesus. And when he did, Jesus looked at him and said, what do you want me to do for you? Now, of course, Jesus knew, but he is engaging the man, engaging the situation, and making application for the man's faith. What is it you want? What is it you are believing? And the man wants to do what? Lord Jesus, Rabboni, by sense of calling Jesus a teacher, I want to regain my sight. And so in that request, his request was answered. Jesus, go. Your faith has made you well. Notice, go. Your faith has made you well. The man believed and he was healed, but notice what the man did. And this is the beauty of it all. He regained his sight once he was able to see. Listen to me, saints. Listen to me. This is the key. Once the man was able to see, notice the man didn't do as many others, or even the former blind man who regained his sight. The man followed after Jesus. Jesus was on the road going to Jerusalem. Once this man got his sight, he joined Jesus' band. He became a disciple of Jesus. Now, how does this all fit? In a very simple way, and I don't even need to exaggerate it. The man, blind Bartimaeus, is symbolic of the disciples. Think about the very context of all things. In the section that we discussed today, Jesus talked about what? His suffering and death. The disciples come to Jesus, James and John, wanting to be honored and elevated, but they want to do it in a domineering sense. like the Gentiles of the world, ruling over people with harshness. I don't care about you. But Jesus was saying, this is not the way to do things. Whenever you become a ruler, per se, he who wishes to be first, he who wishes to be greatest, must become the servant and the slave. In other words, what you do is not in disregard to the people that come before you, it's because you care for them. You are not the ruler who says to folk, now go and do what I say. And the reason why you said that was your judgment. No, you are the servant who is serving them for what is best for them. So if you have to give reprove, it's what was best for them. If you have to rebuke them, it was what was best for them. Whatever you did out of love and service for them. This was what Jesus was teaching. Okay, covered that. But they didn't get that. They wanted to be great. And then we move into the situation. What is the problem of the situation of blind Bartimaeus? What's the problem with the disciples? You are blind. You are blind. And what should be the heart of the disciples? The blind Bartimaeus was brought to Jesus. Jesus asked him the obvious question. He was blind. What is the obvious question? What do you want me to do for you? Well, what do you think I want you to do? Give me sight. Make me see. And Jesus made him see, and he followed Jesus. And what's the problem with the disciples? They are blind. And what should the disciples want? Jesus, help us to see. That's what Jesus was doing when the disciples got mad with James and John, calling them to themselves. That's what Jesus was doing over and over again, ever since they rejected Jesus, that is the Jewish leaders. Jesus taking time to teach the disciples as he's getting ready to come to Jerusalem. That's what Jesus been trying to do. He's been trying to help his disciples to see who he is, see how they should be, see what they should do. And even here in the context, see the kind of spirit, the kind of servant spirit that they need to have as leaders in the church that is to come. Not in this elevation in Israel that they're thinking about, but in their future ministries as apostles to the church. They need to see how they need to be. And once their eyes are open, do what Bartimaeus did. Follow Jesus. Notice what Jesus said at the very end. For the Son of Man did not come into the world to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus used himself as an example. And at the very end, what did blind Bartimaeus do? Once his eyes were open, he followed Jesus. And once the eyes of the disciples are opened, they too will follow Jesus. On the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Ghost comes down and fills them, opens their minds all the way up, opens their heart all the way up to the teachings of Jesus, to the ways of Jesus. Look at the disciples, look at the apostles from that point forward. They are no longer trying to look at themselves to be served by the other people. You see in the book of Acts, they are serving the church. They got it. Their eyes have been opened. Okay. I didn't want to preach it. I wanted to teach it. But I preached it. So what? So that's it. Thanks for joining me, guys. I'm done joining, but let's do what we always do, a quick summary. And I've been summarizing it the whole time, so this summary should be pretty short within and of itself. Again, heading toward Jerusalem, Jesus tells them about, very detailed, the things that he would suffer in Jerusalem, how he would finally be crucified and then rise from the dead. The disciples did not get it. They didn't get it because they rejected it. It was not because of lack of clarity on Jesus's part. It was because this was contrary to what they believed was going to happen, how they think things should play out, how they thought Jesus should do. That is, bring in the kingdom right then and the glory right then. How is this evidence that this was the disciples' belief? Here comes James and John, and they're asking Jesus to sit in elevated positions on the right and the left. And they wanted this to be definitive, that all the disciples will know who gonna sit in those seats. Jesus made them to understand, one, you don't understand what you're asking. To sit in places of honor means to suffer like I suffer, to drink the cup, to be baptized with my baptism. But nevertheless, your request to sit at my right hand and my left hand, I cannot give you this request. Only the Father has made this predetermination for the one he determined. Now the rest of the disciples looking at James and John because they beat him to the point of desiring the greatest honor in the kingdom that they believed was about to happen. Jesus used this as a lesson to teach them the service in humility, that the Gentiles are domineering. People come before them and they are sitting in elevated places and, fearful seats of power as people tremble and come before them, and they make decrees to people what they ought to do with disregard to what the people think, disregard to what's best for the person, but because the ruler said, so go and do what I just said. He said, no, this won't be the kind of spirit that is present among you, or nor that you should have, even indicating that future ministry, even in the church. He said, but the one who wants to be greatest shall be servant. The one who wants to be first shall become the slave. This blew their minds and their expectation because their hearts weren't right. They weren't thinking right. And this is the same garbage we have even today. There are very few servant preachers, very few servant pastors, and in doing so, we move to the next section, which was in spiritual indication, blind Bartimaeus. Jesus coming out of old Jericho, going into new Jericho. There he meets a crowd. There's blind Bartimaeus. Here's that Jesus coming through. He begins to call on Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. The people try to quiet him down. Jesus ain't got time for you, man. But he cried ever the more. Jesus stopped hearing that man and told them bring him to him. They brought this man to Jesus. Jesus questioned, what do you want? And that's the whole idea. For the disciples, what do you want? He says, open my eyes. I'm going to regain my sight. And Jesus healed this man. Your faith has made you whole. And immediately, notice what the man did? He followed after Jesus. The whole point of all of that, simply to say that the disciples themselves are indicators. You are blind Bartimaeus, but one day your eyes will be open. You will see. And the example that I set in serving, I am the greatest, Jesus said, but I will be servant for all. The apostles, as far as the church is concerned, they are the greatest. And guess what they will become? Once their eyes open, they will become servants to the church, the people of God. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me with that. Join me next time as we continue in our study of Mark's gospel.